Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for those heartfelt words. I think you did a lot of work for us, setting the table, talking about everything from NATO to the EU to obviously Ukraine, Moldova, the Black Sea, China, and lastly, but very importantly, interdependence. I think it's something that we continue to struggle to preserve and protect. And we are going to use your words to inspire us for this first panel of this conference, addressing a very Aspen topic, which is alliances and the values that underscore those alliances, and frankly, the utility that alliances can have. So we are in, as was mentioned, a very dense schedule. It's going to be a high-octane day, and we have about 40 minutes for this discussion. So we're going to take the first 20 minutes for us up here, and then we're going to go to the audience because we definitely want to have audience engagement. So let me introduce the panelists just to start off and call them up to the stage, and please give them a round of applause as they come up. Our first panelist is Jan Marian, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Czechia. Please. He has been the Deputy Foreign Minister since 2023 and is a diplomat's diplomat, I would say, has held several roles in the MFA, including Special Envoy for the Eastern Partnership. So welcome. Our second panelist is Diana Stojka. Diana, please. Diana is Chairwoman of the European Affairs Committee in the Chamber of Deputies here in Romania. And very importantly and interestingly, she was one of the first people in a delegation going to Ukraine right after the full-scale invasion. So wonderful experience. I'm sure it was very impactful, and look forward to your insights. Our third panelist is Tomáš Kľavňa. Please. I hope I got it. He gave me a thumbs up. Tomáš is the Executive Director for the Aspen Institute Central Europe, has an academic and communications background, and was spokesperson and senior advisor to the President of Czechia, and is an author of several books, including, I think, and this is one we might want to engage on, The World According to Trump, which just came out this year. So I'm sure there are lots of interesting insights there. And our final panelist is Lucia Boswinkle, please. Lucia is an expert on security affairs and works at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy at the Brussels School of Governance at Vrije Universiteit Brussels, has several other affiliations with other think tanks, and has previously been working as a strategic analyst at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. So we have our panel. Thanks, everybody. And last but not least, I'm Tyson Barker. I am a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the German Council on Foreign Relations. But more importantly for this conversation, I am an Aspen, Germany alum, and I believe many people in this audience are Aspen alums. And as we know, we come together in this values community again and again, and I'm always happy to be back with this family and this community. So let me start off with this statement. Last week, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen gave a speech, her State of the European Union speech, and she said, it was very arresting. She said, Europe is in a fight. But I actually think she meant something even more severe, that Europe is at war. That war takes different valences in different countries. Obviously, if we're talking about Ukraine, we're talking about a full-scale conventional war from an aggressor, Russia. But that war is also taking place in other places like Romania, Czechia, across the European Union, and into North America and elsewhere in the form of hybrid warfare, cyber warfare, active measures, manipulation of democratic processes, etc. So let me start with a question for you, Jan. How do you see Czechia's position in these valences of war, in these dimensions of war, and how can Czechia, as a middle power that really relies on alliance structures, add value to defend and protect this community that we love?
Thank you so much, and many thanks for having us. I think we have a good Czech representation here on the panel, which also shows how good relations we have between Romania and Czechia. Well, how can Czechia contribute? I think we can contribute on some files by leading by example, because it was my country that expelled most of the Russian diplomats several years ago. So now we have only 7 Russian diplomats in Czechia, and we can come up with ideas and solutions how to improve, how to do more of the homeworks, how to improve our resilience, and how to support countries like Moldova, which we also do for years, how we operate in Ukraine. And I'm happy to see Ukrainian delegation on board here, because Ukraine is our security provider these days, and it's really important to work with Ukraine to be there. This is something Czechia is doing. So I think we can show that we can offer smart solutions on some files. We have Czech companies in Ukraine. We have joint defense projects already now. And it's about doing the homework. That's something that we also hear, of course, from the US. It's about burden sharing, so it's about doing the homework on the European part of NATO.
Well, and it's great to hear that you're doing co-production and joint ventures with Ukrainian defense companies. I know that's a big part of the European Union's initiatives to rearm this $800 billion initiative, or 800 billion euro initiative, let's say. Diana, you chair the committee that deals with Europe in the Chamber of Deputies here. What are some issues that you are looking at when you are trying to fortify Romania's and Europe's security?
Thank you. First of all, I think that we are most fortunate to be able to have the time and space for this conversation. And I want to thank Aspen for facilitating it. And I believe that we are fortunate to have this because we are part of alliances, and whether it is NATO or the EU. And I think that this is something that Ukraine didn't have. And that's why Russia thought it could just start an invasion and get away with it. And it did strike me the most when I visited Ukraine, as you mentioned, and I saw the houses, I saw the clothes, the toys of the kids on the road, and it looked so much like Romania that all I could think of was, this could have been us. And I think we understand by now that we can't escape geography. We cannot afford to ignore dictators. And what we can do is stand together and fight together. And our fights may look different, as you mentioned, because I also believe that we are in an invisible war in Romania, and that has been obvious to all of us, especially during the last presidential elections. I think we basically only have 2 choices available for all of us. We either succeed together or we fail one by one. And that's why I think it's so important that the EU and our alliances keep supporting Ukraine with all that's necessary for them to succeed. Because as you mentioned, they're not only fighting for themselves. And here I hope that the US will be a lot braver in regards to economic sanctions towards the aggressor. I think the EU has learned many of the lessons the past few years have provided us with. I think we learned that we cannot be dependent on Asia for medical supplies, and I think we are finally taking the direct steps in the correct direction. And our country will do more to enhance its abilities to produce, what we need in our country and what we need in our European family. I think that we need to do everything, us as Romanians and us at the European level, and I think we've been doing a good job with this, with bringing Ukraine and Moldova as part of the European family. I think we could have a better understanding of the urgency that is necessary for this. I don't think we have too much time. And we do need to do everything that is necessary to reduce the energy dependency on Russia. We cannot allow them to hold us as hostages for much longer. And as my colleague mentioned, we need to do everything that's necessary to increase our military production capabilities. We cannot rely, and I think we have seen this more in the current administration, entirely on the US for our security. So I think at a European level, we are, as Ursula von der Leyen also highlighted in her State of the Union speech, we are taking steps in the right direction. I think what we could do better is collaborate more and exchange our knowledge in regards to the hybrid war. I think we are all being subjected to. I think it's stronger in countries like Romania. We've seen Moldova as they're preparing for the elections. But I think we could do a better job at European level on this.
Thank you so much. You bring up great points on the strength of alliances, that it's hanging together or hanging separately, as they used to say around the American Revolution. Tomasz, question for you. I mean, Diana stresses the importance of interdependence and then talks about inoculating yourself to vulnerabilities. One of the things, the misperceptions we have about Russia, the aggressor in this conflict, this European conflict, is that it's isolated. It has a counter, almost quasi-alliance, reliant on, you know, China, North Korea, Iran for various supplies and supply chains and markets. How can we best address that in this alliance system that we all live in and support?
Well, that is a great question, and I think that can only be addressed if you have a strategy, right? And I am in doubt about this, because when I look at what's going on in the European-American relationship in the last few months, I'm thinking about it on two levels. Yes, we still have some specific cooperation, and Minister was talking about this here. There is interoperability, there's very specific cooperation by way of exercises, weapons, etc. But these are products of alliances, right? In order for the products of alliances to exist, you need preconditions for alliances, and these are purely political. And one of the most important preconditions for any alliance is voluntary self-limitation. You can look at the European Union. This is essentially based on voluntary self-limitation, pooling of sovereignty, sharing of sovereignty. You give up something in exchange for getting something bigger. But you cannot do that if you do not have a grand strategy to which everyone in that alliance subscribes to, right? I don't think we have anything like that. From the United States, I disagree that the United States today has a strategy for a new world, right? There may be a strategy in 𝐓𝐸𝐺𝐬𝐿bridge-Colby's mind at the Pentagon, but the White House is very transactional, and it can always stop any of this at any point, right? We simply don't know what's going on, what's going to happen within a couple of weeks. We do not have a strategy here in Europe. There is one emerging. We certainly need to be more self-reliant, right? But how are we going to rebalance this new relationship with the United States is really a big question. We are simply winging it. We are managing it. We are not really building for strength, because this is the time of great uncertainty. This is unfortunate on several levels, the most obvious being Ukraine, and there the situation fortunately is now much better in terms of Euro-American dialogue than it was a few months ago. But we are still managing the situation. This is not something that would point to a grander strategy, and therefore would be able to address the question you asked me, right, on India, on China. What is the strategy? We don't really know. Why are we talking about this? I think the bodies such as Aspen Institute are really important for keeping the alliance of values intact. And if we are going to do that, we need to think very seriously about the future on that strategic level. We need to think about what's going to happen post-Trump, post this administration. This is not going to go back to what it used to be. This is going to be a very different alliance. You know, Europe will be more self-reliant, but how Europe will look like, we don't know, right? This is not just about defense, this is about artificial general intelligence, labor markets, economies, research in genomics, all these things that are going to completely change our societies. So this is the platform to think about these large questions for the future. And I'm really glad that we are working with young leaders, because they will be talking about this, they will be thinking about this. They will, in a few years' time, be the ones who will be deciding the nature of this relationship. So let's step back and think about the strategy. What is the strategy? I don't know now.
Okay, that was an excellent, very arresting analysis of what is happening in my country. I think you are right to say that it's an evolving picture. Lotte, you spend a lot of time watching the United States as well and its security posture. Can you drill down a little bit into what you see as what might be happening in the near to midterm in the United States vis-a-vis the alliance structure in Europe?
Thank you so much also for including me on this very esteemed panel. As has been mentioned now a few times, in Europe we face high uncertainty, both when it comes to our threat environment, but also the role that the United States will play in European security. And as Mr. Joanna mentioned also before, very few expect a full US decoupling, what appears certain is that there will be some sort of rebalancing of America's role in European security. Now, we don't know yet where this is heading. The US may simply cut some troops while leaving the while leaving the fundamental alliance architecture unchanged. It could move towards some sort of residual but still strategically significant presence in Europe, or more radically, it could adapt a role as offshore balancer. Now, the depth of the changes to the transatlantic division of labor will matter greatly, but what is certain is that across the spectrum, it will demand significant changes on Europe's side, given the outside role that the United States currently plays in European security. So starting with conventional defense, the US currently amplifies, or has since the start of NATO amplified and enabled European denial efforts through the provision of command, intelligence, enablers, air defenses, but also its large in-theater presence, pre-positioning of stocks, and reinforcement capacity. So it really provides coherence to NATO's defense architecture, and any sudden shift would leave quite critical gaps. Now, when it comes to deterrence, obviously Europe relies quite heavily on the United States nuclear umbrella, but also its other escalation management tools. And of course, Europe has its own nuclear powers and also some non-nuclear strategic escalation tools. But really, Washington is the only ally providing escalation options and deterrence across the full spectrum of the escalation ladder. Now Europe is hard at play to plug the various gaps and defend that a reduced US role could leave, but the depth of any reposturing will really matter greatly to the challenges that we face. So when it comes to conventional defense, it could be relatively straightforward to increase our manpower, to increase our ammunition stocks, to replace certain enabling capabilities that the United States currently provides. And we see really good initiatives moving ahead, with often Eastern flank allies leading the way. So we see increased cooperation and integration in long-range fires between the Nordics and the Baltic states and Poland. We see other allies further away from the flank doing their part. Germany has been moving ahead in standardizing and integrated capabilities, logistics, and doctrines with Eastern flank allies. Deeper cuts, however, would also mean that Europeans may have to take on additional component or operational commands. And really, the deeper a US, or the more significant a US retreat, the more fragmentation could actually exist or could occur in our command structure. Now then, when it comes to deterrence and escalation management, Europeans will need to step up to invest more in our conventional strategic weapons, but also probably play an increased role in in NATO's extended deterrence architecture. And we may need, or especially the UK and France, may also need to assume an augmented role. Now, Europeans are indeed now building up their capacity for precision strike, for deep strike. We see that acquisitions in Poland and Romania of F-35s, those could potentially pave the way for a greater Eastern flank participation in nuclear sharing missions. Then we see France and the UK announcing greater cooperation when it comes to nuclear matters. However, a more radical scenario out there could actually require additional steps. So we may have to think of French nuclear sharing options. Important, I want to highlight that important in all these changes, in this strengthening of our deterrence architecture, is that it's not just about deterring Russia, it's also about assuring allies. So really the question is, what would it take for French and British nuclear commitments to be credible here in Romania, in the Baltics, in Poland? And perhaps as a final note, key to understanding Europe's strategic predicament is this notion that it's not just current domestic politics in the United States that are shaping the uncertainty and the changes at hand. It is Europe, our continent, is being deprioritized in a broader sense in US strategy. So really any efforts in Europe will have to plan for this, will have to be about structural changes rather than simply contingency planning for one administration. And I do think that the EU will probably have an important role to play in this as well, by financing production surges, driving standardization, and shaping really a defense market that is up to NATO's demands. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, 𝐓𝐲𝐬𝐿. That was really, really helpful. I think you put a lot of things on the table, more operational examples of integration and responding to the current threat and political landscape, both the threat of Russia and the changing political dynamics in the United States. I'm going to open it up to the audience, but before I do, I'm going to ask one final question to Jan, drawing on these last two comments. So we had a critique, I think it was provocative from Tomasz, which is basically the Europeans are being reactive. They're not being proactive. They're responding to events as they occur, but they're not thinking broadly about what they can drive forward. And then we have some examples which are useful because it demonstrates that that reactiveness can be effective and can start to anticipate future needs. But you work in the MFA in Czechia. Put on your grand strategy hat for a second. If you were trying to be proactive and think about the scenario that Tomasz was describing, the post-Trump scenario, where the reality is the United States plays a lesser role in European defense, and that the threat landscape is much more fraught, which we already have. What are the elements that should be in that?
Well, that's a nice question. Indeed, I'm just a practitioner. So first, I think the changes we see in the US, also domestically, I think this is going to stay with us under this administration, under any future administration. Second, Russia is, I would say, not going to change, even without Mr. Putin. Plus, and this was discussed yesterday and today, we have changing situation with technology, environmental challenges. All this is here to stay. So it still boils down to doing the homeworks and looking for alliances. I mean, we have the key alliances, which is the EU and NATO, but within these formats, we need to build partnerships with Romania and others. And as to the grand strategy, well, that's a good question, since we are so busy with reacting, as we heard. I think it's changing. I think as to Russia, we learned that we can be proactive ourselves. It used to be the other way around. So let's do more on this, and let's listen to experts, what they can offer. But really, I think these days it's sometimes very much about day-to-day management.
I couldn't agree more, having worked in 2 US administrations. We are going to turn to the audience. We have a question here. I don't know if we have a microphone that is wandering around. If not, I'm happy to get up and provide a microphone. I'll just come to you. It's like a talk show. And please identify yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandru Manda. I'm also an Aspen Fellow. A few months ago, on the stage of Globsec, by the way, welcome to Bucharest, Robert, President Pavel stated that Russia is not at war just with Ukraine, but with the entire Western way of doing politics, with the entire Western community. So, from my point of view, for Ukraine, we did too little and too late, because the aggression started in 2014, not with a full-scale invasion in 2022. What's, from your point of view, the most important thing the Eastern flank should do today, have to do it today, to prevent an escalation and a bigger conflict in Eastern flank of NATO with Russia? Thank you. Could you address the question for all the panelists? Thank you.
Okay. Who wants to take it up first? Diana?
Well,
Jan, please.
I fully agree with you. It's been too little, too late. It's changing, but we are still lagging behind. If we provided the same level of assistance to Ukraine back in 2014, the situation would have been different. But I do remember the debates in Brussels 10 or more years ago. At that time, what our Polish, Lithuanian colleagues, our Romanian colleagues, sometimes Czechia used to say, was perceived as something that's hawkish. Now this is the new mainstream. Leaders of the EU have made bold decision to offer membership perspective to Ukraine and Republic of Moldova, which was a taboo 10 years ago. So it's too little, too late, and let's do more. I would say let's do more of the same, which is currently more ammunition and support to Ukraine, more support to reform, seeing Ukraine as an important partner and hub. The same goes for Moldova, and working with like-minded. Of course, we have to beef up our defense on the eastern flank, but currently the best defense for our region, not only in Central Europe, but this region, is more support to Ukraine. That's our best defense investment.
I agree with that, and if I take that a little bit beyond that and imagine that there at one point will be some sort of truce, you know, on the front, and there will be some sort of line through the eastern Ukrainian territory, I think it's really important for Europe and hopefully also for the United States to integrate this part of the world as much into the Euro-Atlantic world as possible. I envision something like South Korea or West Germany, right? It is very, very important for Ukraine to succeed, to be integrated into the European Union, to build prosperity. On a smaller scale, you can see it, for example, in the Balkans. When you travel to Croatia and cross from Croatia to Serbia, these used to be areas 30 years ago that had roughly the same living standard. When you look at Croatia, which has been integrated into Europe, and Serbia, which has not been, it's a huge difference. We have to do everything in our power to integrate Ukraine so that Ukraine can actually build up its society and prosperity. That will be the best response to Putin post-war if we ever get to that truce.
Yeah, can I say something quick? I think indeed that Russia is in a way also trying to decouple the United States, but also driving wedges within NATO, and it's using also the more below the threshold aggressions in order to sow divisions and maybe potentially create some cracks in our deterrence architecture, because it counts on this asymmetry in stakes that what may matter to eastern flank countries matters less further away from the borders with Russia. So I think what is very important to make sure that we also stand together. Well, it's really ensuring that there's this coherence in our ability to respond to these aggressions, to have also a rapid and significant ability to respond, to deter, and to defend along the eastern flank, especially when decision making in capitals further away could be a bit slower. Thanks.
I'm Denis Poltevits, Aspen, Kyiv. I have a question to Tomasz. You spoke about the, let's say, absence actually of strategy that should kind of join or serve as a uniting point for any alliance. So how you would define the let's say, the goals of this strategy? So what are the strategic goals of any alliance that is based in Europe?
Let's just gather some questions. So hold on to that. What are the strategic goals of any alliance strategy? Here.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for your insights and analysis. They were really interesting. 𝐷𝐤𝐵, I'm an Aspen alumnus as well. My question is directed to all panelists and is mostly about war fatigue. We see it mostly in the population, maybe not that much in authorities, but let's take a scenario where, of course, we all hope the war ends as soon as possible. And a lot of people were really optimistic, let's say at the start of the Trump mandate, that he said he will end the war. This still hasn't happened. But let's take a scenario in which this war will take longer and it will go into, I don't know, 5, 7 years. what should we do in the eastern flank and in NATO? Should we change something today for taking into account the fatigue and the longer war, of course, that nobody wants to happen?
An excellent question. We have one more over here, and then we'll go back to the panelists.
Yes, thank you. My name is Marius Gincha. And my question is related to a comment made earlier about grand strategy, American grand strategy. You're mentioning about the American retrenchment and basically Europe becoming less relevant in the overall American grand strategy. And I think that we are missing an important point here, that American grand strategy is changing in a more deeper way. In the Cold War, in the post-Cold War era, the American grand strategy was defined by a mechanism of cooptation through the provision of public goods, the US dollar as the reserve currency, the provision of security to Europe and other parts of the world. That was a soft form of grand strategy in which you were trying to co-opt your rivals into your own hegemonic order. Right now, we are shifting towards a more coercive form of strategy, right? Which is much more typical of what the Soviet Union tended to use after the Second World War. How would America's allies respond to a grand strategy that does not rely on cooptation and the provision of public goods, but on compellence, on coercion?
Thank you so much. So let's take those three questions and then just go down the line, and then we'll wrap up on time. We'll stick the landing. So we had, the first question was, and feel free to pick up whatever elements you want to pick up. So we had the question of strategy. What are the objectives? How do we define objectives for Europe's strategy? We had a question about war fatigue, which is something I think is very important to factor in. It's taking place in all of our countries. And how do we prime a population for a war that might last longer than we're currently setting in our discourse? And the third question was about US grand strategy changing from the provision of public goods, so the carrots, to something that is much more coercive, so something that is more sticks-based. So let's just go down the line and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, if I may, on the second question, well, I don't think we should be discussing war fatigue in the room with our Ukrainian allies first. Yes, it became a new normal. I mean, what you hear from Russians as to the last drone event or attack in Poland and Romania, we have the same situation here. What you hear from Russians is, a week ago, on that day we just operated against military targets in Western Ukraine. And that's the new normal, which, I mean, it's very close to your border, to our border, and that's the new normal. And I have doubts that war will end anytime soon. We are very active in the coalition of the willing as to the planning for future steps. But look at what Russia is telling us. They are not interested in this. You hear no NATO troops, no troops on the ground, no boots on the ground. I'm very skeptical, and although we should be ready for this, and look back at 2014 and at the Minsk agreement. We've been through this before, so let's not repeat the same mistake. Let's arm Ukraine and let's do the homework.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we need to be better at anticipating Russia's moves and draw some lines in the sand that are non-negotiable. Ukraine needs real guarantees, and Ukraine had a form of guarantees that were not respected. So we can't forget that in the past. In regards to what Decebal mentioned towards war fatigue, I think we need to be better at communicating to our people what's at stake. I think the Russian propaganda is gaining more and more terrain on social media, and we need to just do a better job. And that's mostly us politicians and obviously the administrations in each country.
Thank you.
Well, you asked me about that strategy for Europe. So I think that for Europe, Europe needs to think of building up its strength in order to become eventually a geostrategic power. Europe is an economic power. It, in a way, is a cultural power. It's a regulatory power, right? We love to brag about that. But we are not a geostrategic power because, very frankly, no one takes us seriously. Putin is not taking us seriously. That's why he can just, say things that he's saying now without fearing that there will be serious consequences. So that's something that we have to do, right? The second really important element in that strategy is to keep the transatlantic alliance intact post-Trump, right? It's going to be a different alliance, but we need to keep that because we are based on the same values, same history. We really are very close to each other in many ways because of the Enlightenment and everything that came after that. I know what it would require to build such an alliance, but do I think it's going to be successful? I don't know, right? Because of that thing I mentioned before, voluntary self-limitation. That is not very sexy in today's politics. This is not something that will win you elections. But in order for Europe to become a power, it has to be even more united. It has to get rid of veto in many decision-making, elements of its bureaucracy and politics. And is this on the table today? I'm not sure about that, right? Is this something that European Commission is going to drive towards? I don't know. It has to become much more competitive economically. At least there is discourse going on about that these days. But in terms of becoming a geostrategic power, really having European interests vis-a-vis the United States and China, for example, or Asia, that has to be on the table. And I don't know whether we are capable of doing that because we're simply not United States of Europe and never will be.
Oh, thank you. And Lotia.
Yeah, thanks. 2 points. Well, first of all, I very much agree with what has been said about clear communication with European citizens and publics about the stakes we're facing and the need for our continued commitment. I think there's also been quite interesting trends in the last few years that not that many initially predicted about also making Ukraine more resilient and really investing also in its defense industry, which also which makes Ukraine also a bit less vulnerable to shocks in supplies. But I fully support the communication, and I think also when I look around in the Netherlands, and I mean Brussels, maybe it's more for sure, surely, but I do feel that there is this sense of urgency amongst European publics that is quite broadly. But yeah. It's a tricky question. And then finally, perhaps on your question about retrenchment and how Europe can better withstand coercive practices, I'll focus it a bit on the military side of things, as that is also what I was focusing on in my remarks. Well, clearly strategic autonomy is a bit of an unpopular word, and I'm also not advocating for that. I think it is, well, I think in the short term, it's impractical and feasible. Very, very risky. However, as the various dependencies that I outlined or tried to outline before, I think there's so much ground to gain in becoming less dependent for our security on the United States. And I think for me, that is a very important step and a very important effort to make sure that we're not so reliant and vulnerable to US policy. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Lotia. This was an excellent opening for the day. I think if I'm thinking about the tone of this conversation, I think it was very clear-eyed in assessing the risks, the constraints, and the needs in a way that it doesn't shy away from the truth of the reality that's facing Europe right now, be it having an aggressor on its front doorstep, be it having a United States that seems to be evolving in directions that are ambivalent for our current alliance system, be it the threats at home, whether it be publics that are ambivalent to Europe's role in the world or its own economic competitiveness. I think these are really important things to start to get on the table for this discussion. And with that, I want to thank the panel for this great opener and turn the floor over to Alina for the next session. So thank you so much.